Hello everyone. How you guys doing? My name is Mark. This is Why I Hate the World. Almost on time today. I'm only 2 minutes late. That's good. Lewis the Hedgehog, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining. So, let's see here. Let me just adjust this a little bit. Okay. Um, Today, we are going to continue our exploit. Wait, I'm currently watching a surfing contest in Nags Head in North Carolina. Oh, right on. That's cool, right on. I tried being a surfer myself for a little while. I mean, Southern California, it's like prime surfer real estate, but yeah, I was never any good at it. It's fun though, you know. Okay, so we are going to continue our series exploring the wide, wacky world of fringe right-wing lunatics out there. And this week's stream is going to be all about the militia movement. So, I think we're sort of working our way through, crazy people on the right. We talked about QAnon people. We talked about sovereign citizens. So, militia people is just a logical progression here. But before we jump into that, I wanted to do something a little bit, fun to kind of start us off for the stream. So let's let's see. Wanted to show you guys some fun stuff. I have some screen grabs that I got, let's see, turn on my right monitor. Wanted to talk about a few of these before we get into the meat of our discussion for today. Some funny stuff that I've collected from the internet. This is Charlie Kirk making a horribly bad prediction on Twitter. Hey, liberals, do you notice that when conservative lose races, we don't riot, scream, smash windows, burn cars, assault people, or need days off work? It's amazing how mature and civil conservatives are. Please remember this and take notes when we get Trump reelected in 2020. This, of course, was in November of, 2018. Just demonstrating how Charlie Kirk does not have the power to see the future. In fact, he couldn't have been more wrong. Another swing and a miss for Nostradamus. I thought that was funny. I wanted to share that with you guys. And then another one here. This one, I think, is very ironic, from Aubrey Huff. QAnon has always been a democratic psyop to use against conservatives when their evil agendas are called out. Yeah. Maybe kind of showing that some of the people out there are fed up with QAnon, fed up with all of the some of the right wingers out there are fed up with all of the QAnon bullshit and the repeated lies and failed predictions and stuff, and that's kind of a good sign. It's a good sign that they're starting to turn on it. Maybe this shit'll go away if enough right wingers turn on it. Of course, QAnon does not look like it's completely dead, because we have our next one that I found. This was on, actually, Reddit. I got this one. Oh my god, fuck you! Go away! Okay. Dude, fuck off! Thank you. Alright. The rabbit hole. Anyone who studies Illuminati, the Vatican, Catholic Church, Jesuits, Federal Reserve, Freemasonry, elite globalists, Zionism, New World Order, Hollywood, all of it. Anyone who goes really deep finds God, the book of life, and Christ. It's all about him. It's a war against him. Just kind of showing that, this is from the fortruthnot.religion.com website. Kind of shows that, all of this conspiracy theory stuff is pretty much indistinguishable from just Christianity. It's sort of made its inroads into mainstream Christianity. And you can't really just, you can't really distinguish where the conspiracy theory shit stops and religion begins, So I thought that was funny. And then, of course, I have one more for you guys, which I can't tell if this is a troll or not. I don't know. This one, I think, is open to debate here. Right. I mean, holy fuck. That just says it. Oh, wait, you know what? Let me make that a little smaller because you can't read the bottom. Come on. Can I zoom out on this a little? Oh, fuck, it's not going to let me zoom out. Okay, maybe I can, like, make this smaller. There we go. All right. Yeah. That is, I'm kind of speechless when I see this, you know? Part of me says it has to be a troll. Okay, it's gotta be a troll, but then you gotta remember who we're dealing with. QAnon people, religious people, you know, they're not the sharpest tools in the shed here, you know. And the signs that this QAnon conspiracy shit has just, you know, become one with mainstream, you know, with Christianity in general is just like, it's there. American evangelical Christianity, at least. You know, I wouldn't say Christianity across the whole world. So, I don't know. I hope this is a troll, you know, but something is telling me that it's legit. Anyway, I just wanted to share those things with you guys. Thank you for watching, and thank you guys. See that we have a couple of viewers here. Thanks for joining. Now let's get into the meat of our discussion. Right. Last week we talked a lot about various sort of pseudo militia type movements, right? Oh wait, hang on. Before we start, I gotta let my cat out because he's trying to get out of the room. Okay, come on. Out you go. Out, out, out. Sorry. Didn't know he was in here. Anyway, so last week we kind of talked about some sort of I guess the precursors to militia movements, which was you know, various kind of, I guess you would say, the Posse Comitatus, right, and other right-wing like conservative tax protester type movements, right, from the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of those. You know, people like Clive Bundy and all that, you know, those sort of sovereign citizen types, right? And the militia movement essentially grew out of those types of movements, you know, especially Posse Comitatus had a really big influence on them. There are some other groups going back at least into the 60s, things like the California Rangers is another one. You know, mainly these were people protesting taxes who just happened to also really be into the Second Amendment and be armed, and, you know, were essentially paramilitary type groups, right? There were a lot of those. But what made the militias a thing was that they tried to get this air of legitimacy through the 90s, right? Like, they kind of started with a lot of connections to really fringe right-wing racist groups, the Aryan nations, things like that, you know, which we'll talk about. But then they tried to make themselves kind of legit. They would often, during the 90s at least, not so much today, they would often go and offer services to the police departments, that kind of thing. And they would go to police departments and say, hey, you know, for example, if you have, like, we could take over certain programs if you're not, you know, like if you're cutting budgets. Like, I watched a video where a militia in Michigan offered to take over the DARE program from the local police, for example, that kind of thing, right? And then they would also say stuff like, oh, you know, we're training for the general defense of the state, and, you know, for example, say there's like a manhunt, you know, for like a lost child. Not a manhunt for a criminal, but like, you know, say there's like lost hikers or a lost child or something like that out in the woods. We'll organize and we'll go help the police and that kind of thing, right? And they sort of tried to legitimize themselves in the 90s, right? But at the same time, there was like a lot of anti-government sentiment, a lot of, especially when it came to taxes, right? A lot of tax protesting, a lot of things like, you know, not paying any taxes or fees, right? Or, you know, registrations, things like that, you know. A lot of that, right? There was a lot of rhetoric, like anti-government rhetoric, you know, literature espousing extreme right-wing views, things like, you know, one day we're going to have to, like, fight the Zionists or whatever in the government, that kind of thing. Lots of anti-Semitism, lots of racism. So they never really kind of, you know, got that far away from those roots. But there was, you know, there was an organization of, you know, of militia groups that tried to make themselves legit. So for that reason, that's what I'm classifying as a militia group. So certain groups that we won't be talking about, you know, here, that some people call militias, but they don't really fit that mold. Things like the Black Panthers, for example, right? Cody Course, hey, how you doing? Thanks for joining. I will read your comments at the end there, as usual, I promise. For example, things like the Black Panthers. Some people would say that they were an early example of a militia. Well, they don't really fit the mold. The Black Panthers never really tried to claim that they were an organization that was founded for protecting a particular state, you know, from all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's one thing that all the militia groups tended to share, is that they would say, you know, we're going to uphold the Constitution, and we're here to protect the state from all enemies, foreign and domestic, you know. And it's just the bizarre, right-wing, insane interpretation of protecting the Constitution, right? You know, a lot of these people interpreted that to mean that, to say that we're going to protect the Constitution from the politicians who are trying to like collect taxes from us. That was one of the problems. You know, we're going to protect the Constitution from the police who like to you know, shoot people when they go to arrest you for illegally possessing you know, possessing illegal firearms, and you don't want to give them away. You don't want to, like, you know, comply, and so they kill you, right? That kind of thing. So, you know, the Black Panthers never really claimed that they were there to protect the state, you know, like the state of New York or the state of Illinois or any shit like that. They were Black Panthers were a paramilitary group there that were interested in protecting black people, you know, and I guess some would say even call them a separatist movement, which they didn't really, you know, yeah, I guess there was a little bit of that, but their main focus seemed to be protecting, you know, the black community, right? Another group I'm not going to really talk about too much, because they don't really seem to fit the mold of militias, is the Proud Boys, because the Proud Boys is not really a militia. They're more like a gang at this point. You know, although there is a big crossover between Proud Boys and militias, militias don't usually go and engage protesters in the street and fight them and beat them and shoot people. The Proud Boys do. You know, that's the difference. You know, militia guys, like people like the 3%ers, they'll show up at it, say, like a BLM protest or a Black Lives Matter, you know, or a George Floyd protest, something like that. They'll show up there and they'll just stand around and be intimidating. And maybe they'll stand outside of a 7-Eleven or some shit and like be like, we're protecting this 7-Eleven from getting burned down or some shit like that, right? They don't usually go around and you know, patrolling gangs to find you know, feminists and leftists and Antifa people to assault. Not really, although there is examples of that you can find videos of people getting in fights with 3%ers and shit like that, but they don't usually instigate fights. They just use intimidation, really. It's the Proud Boys will go around and instigate fights with people and get in people's faces, and, you know, they're suspected of actually murdering people when it came to the CHOP, you know, the Seattle's autonomous zone. And there was actually, that was part of the reason that got shut down, is because people kept getting shot in the areas around there, and a couple people actually died. And, you know, the reports are that the people who were shot and they survived claimed that they were like Proud Boy types who were driving around shooting people, you know. So you don't get that, you know. Oath Keepers, for example, won't drive around and attack and randomly blow away random fucking people. But then there are other people that will, you know. There's another group, for example, the Boogaloo Boys, right? Are they a militia? I mean, I don't know. We'll talk a little bit about them later. But you know, they don't seem to be an organized militia in so much as they are like a movement. You know, like you could compare the Boogaloo Boys more to Black Lives Matter. You know, Black Lives Matter is not really an organized. It's not really an organization. It's more of a movement of like-minded people. Like that's, you know, Boogaloo Boys are the same thing, except instead of standing for equality and, you know, protecting people from police brutality, they stand for trying to start the second, you know, American Civil War and, you know, murdering liberals. That's what they stand for, and shooting police officers and shit like that. But we'll talk about them later at the towards the end of the discussion here. So where did all this shit come from, right? You know, well, first off, a lot of militia groups, you know, they kind of started off, kind of mostly started in the 90s, right? Late 80s, early 90s, and these groups, there were a couple of events that, you know, spurned the creation of militia groups, right? So you had things like, you know, tax protester groups, you know, like in the 80s, Posse Comitatus, stuff like that, you know, and you had these sort of right-wing pseudo-militias going all the way back even to the 1960s and before, right? And but the actual modern militia movement began in the early 90s, and there were a couple of events that sort of triggered it. And one of the early ones was actually, and one of the biggest ones that some of these guys even today will cite as a reason why they do this is Ruby Ridge. Right, so Ruby Ridge was in 1992, and what it was, there was a guy named Randy Weaver, right, who, you know, was wanted for illegally possessing firearms, right, and, you know, the FBI tried to arrest him, and he held up in his cabin off in the woods, and it resulted in an 11-day standoff between him and, you know, the FBI. And at the end of this standoff, both his wife and his son ended up getting murdered. You know, they were both shot by, like, you know, FBI snipers and shit, right? And that really, you know, before he finally, like, you know, finally turned himself in, right? That really motivated these guys. That really was a big factor in, you know, the formation of the militia movement, right? For Randy Weaver's part, he eventually was found, he was eventually acquitted because it came out that the FBI loosened their normal rules of engagement, right? And then tried to cover that fact up later, and that basically got him off the hook. So, you know, Randy Weaver, I guess, you know, you could say the death of his wife and child is enough punishment. Of course, you know, if he just would have fucking complied and not put his wife and child in danger in the fucking first place, then, you know, they'd still be alive. So let's not forget that shit. You know, it's like, yeah, okay, you know, if you believe a law is unjust, blah, 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 don't obey it, whatever, right? At the same time, if the police show up at your house and they've got snipers and shit, and your family is in the house, you know, for God's sake, fucking turn yourself in. It's not like, I mean, I don't know what this guy was, like, thinking was going to happen. Like, what did he think? They were just going to go away? They were just going to leave him? Right? Like, no, dude. Like, you know, that puts your family in danger. You know, you, like, not complying with the police when they have your fucking house surrounded with, you know, officers with guns drawn because you have fucking illegal firearms in your house that you shouldn't fucking have, and and you're a, like, white supremacist, like, anti-fucking government zealot that, you know, they're afraid you're extremely dangerous and shit. That's not a good situation, and you don't want to be in that, you know, you don't want to put your family in that situation. Randy Weaver is, so I don't know. I mean, it's easy to look back on an event like Ruby Ridge 30 years later and make judgments, right? And who knows what any particular person would do in that situation. But I tell you what I would do. I would fucking give up so that they don't, like, riddle my house with bullets and kill everybody on the inside. Because if you're innocent, you'll fucking get off. That's the problem. That's the thing. You know, if you didn't do it, if you're like, or even if you did do it, at least your family would be alive, right? So, yeah, at that point, it's like, you know, Randy Weaver deserves just as much blame as the FBI for his family getting killed, in my opinion. But anyway, you know, moving on here. So that was a big motivating factor for the formation of the militia movement, right? And after that, so that happened in September, or actually no, it was August. August of 1992 is when Randy Weaver happened, right? And in October of 1992, there was a what was called the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous, right? Which was put on by a guy named Pete Peters. And Pete Peters was a preacher, you know, right-wing preacher, right? Excuse me. He holds this conference, you know, this convention in Estes Park, Colorado, and he put out the call for, you know, conservative leaders to come, and the idea was, what are we going to do to stop another, you know, Ruby Ridge from ever happening, right? So, for his credit, he did invite mainstream conservative leaders to this, but they never showed up. And the only people who did show up were right-wing wackaloon extremists. Okay. Among those people that actually came to this was a guy named Richard Butler, who was the, you know, leader of the Aryan Nations, right? Which is, you know, for those of you who don't know, a notorious, you know, white supremacist prison gang, right? That's the Aryan Nations. Another guy was named Louis Beam, who was the leader of the Texas chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. He shows up at this convention. Then there was a guy named Chris Temple, who was a publisher of a newspaper called the Jubilee, which was a Christian identity, you know, newspaper, right? For those guys, if you don't know, Christian identity is a philosophy, I guess, of Christianity that was begun in the 1930s. That is basically says that only white people are true Christians, right? Claims that only people who are of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon, Nordic, and Germanic descent are the true, you know, true descendants of Abraham, and that everybody else is, you know, a spawn of Satan, literal spawn of Satan. And this is what's called the serpent seed doctrine, right? And the idea is that, you know, Satan had sex with Eve and then gave birth to Cain. Cain was the first murderer, and of course, all of the Jewish people and all of the minorities and everybody else is a descendant of Cain, while all the white people are descendants of Adam, and so they call white people Adamites. And everybody else, you know, everybody else, they call them, if you've heard that term, mud people, that's where this comes from, the serpent seed doctrine. So that's, yeah, white supremacist shit right there. You know, that's the white supremacist, white supremacy ingraining itself in with religion. You know, please remember this shit dates back to, it was at least the 1930s when this was, it might have even been earlier when this was formulated, you know. So, yeah, Chris Temple, very upstanding guy there. Another guy was named Kirk Loynes, who was a lawyer, and what he would do, his business was that he headed up several defense funds that would go and defend white supremacists and neo-Confederates, those types of people. So he was the guy that you called when you got arrested, right? Was and then another guy who was there is named Larry Pratt, who was the founder of Gun Owners for America, right? you know, Second Amendment sort of lobbying type activist group. And then another activist group called English First. And their thing was to try to make English the official language of the United States. So, you know, every time you go to the DMV, for example, and you see driving information printed in Spanish and in Korean and, you know, Chinese and stuff like that, they were adamantly against all that. They were against English as a second language, you know, teaching in schools, curriculums in schools, you know, nothing like that. They wanted to force everybody to learn English because, you know, that's how God wanted it in America. Obviously, God created the United States specifically and only for English-speaking people, and everybody else can go fuck themselves, according to this guy. So, yeah. These are the people that actually showed up. These are the people that laid the groundwork for the militia movement, because that was their solution. Their solution to preventing another Ruby Ridge from ever happening was to form citizen militias. Right. And Larry Pratt actually was a big sort of hand in this. He actually wrote a book in 1990 that was basically calling for, now so this is 2 years before, you know, Ruby Ridge, right? And in his book, it was calling for people to form citizen defense patrols, which would be similar, in his book he describes them as similar to what right-wing fighters in Guatemala or the Philippines did, right? Of course, you know, you're leaving out the fact here that these sort of like, you know, these same groups in the Philippines and in Guatemala and in Colombia, stuff like that, would go around and murder entire villages and shit. And, you know, they were essentially fucking death squads, right? They were like right-wing paramilitary death squads that the government would send out to go kill rebels and shit like that, so that way they can claim, like, you know, we didn't kill these people. It was this, you know, this paramilitary group that we have nothing to do with, when in real life they were really funding them. So that's what this guy wanted. This guy wanted fucking, like, death squads like you would see in Nicaragua and shit, you know, but in the United States, to what, go around and kill who exactly? That's the thing, is that whenever you read literature from the 90s where they talk about, you know, if you ever go, like, there's videos on YouTube of, like, you know, guys giving interviews and stuff from, like, you know, from around this time, right? And then if you ever read any of the literature from around then as well, and they always talk about how they're going to defend the community, defend the states. And it's like, who are you fucking defending it from? You know? Well, read between the lines, man. They're defending it from non-white people. That's who this guy wants, you know? He wants to form paramilitary groups to go around and death squads to go kill non-white people. So, the, you know, the militia groups, right? Although you would often see them claiming that it's not about race, it's all about race, right? It always was all about race from the minute they, like, began. It was all about race, right? And you know, these groups, they're filled with racist people, with anti-Semites, with you know, their literature and their philosophies and all that stuff is just like integrated with right-wing bizarre conspiracy theories, things about the Federal Reserve and the income tax being unconstitutional, and secret cabals of Jews, you know, running the world, right? The protocols of the elders of Zion, stuff like that. You know, things that we covered in our stream 2 weeks ago, the anti-Semitism stream that we talked about. You know, this is where all this stuff, you know, because when you get right-wing wackaloons, you know, they all sort of conjugate together. You know, people who believe extreme things, you know, and live extreme lives tend to, you know, tend to group together like that. You know, what do they call it? Crank magnetism, I think is the name, is what they call that phenomenon. You know, it's the same reason why if you go to a protest, you'll find any given protest, left or right, you're going to find a good 40% of the people at these protests are insane. Yeah, that's what you'll find. You'll find, and this is, you know, left-wing protests, right-wing protests. It'll be the same thing. You know, you get plenty of people believing conspiracy theories of all types. you know, or who are into very fringe political movements of all kinds. And it's because those are the people who are the most active, right? Because they're the most motivated. And it just so happens that on the right wing, the most motivated and the most active are also extremely racist, extremely like anti-government, and you know, anti-Semitic, and extremely violent, as we'll see later. So anyway, gotta keep myself hydrated here. Okay, moving on. So that was in 1992, right? And so militias are kind of, you know, sort of, in their formation stage, right? You know, they're like little maggots that have started to like get into their pupa stages. You know, their cocoons and stuff, right? 1993, we have the Branch Davidian siege at Waco, which is I won't get too much into this because you know that could be a stream and all by itself. But basically, long story short, you know, the Waco compound, I'm sure you've all heard about it. The Branch Davidians there were you know, kind of an offshoot of Seventh Day Adventists. And it was this cult led by a guy named David Koresh. And it definitely fit all of the you know, criteria for a doomsday cult, you know, stocking up weapons and food, and he controlled every aspect of their lives, and he would exploit women that were in the group sexually, stuff like that. You know, there was reports of him having sex with underage girls and that kind of thing, and they were stockpiling weapons. And so the ATF, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, long story short, tried to raid the compound, you know, and that resulted in a shootout where 4 ATF agents and several cultists ended up getting killed, right? And then that results in a 51-day standoff. So now remember, this is like in less than a year. We've had two. You have Ruby Ridge, and then you have Waco. 51-day standoff, right? And you know, I don't know if you weren't around back then. I mean, I was like in high school when this happened. This was 24/7 news for like, you know, that's almost 3 months, right? It was just constant people talking about this and how can we de-escalate and blah 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 and what should we do and who's at fault, you know, this that, and who are the Branch Davidians? Are they really terrorists, or they're just normal, you know? Then you get people on the news saying they're just peaceful Christians, blah blah blah, and then no, they're weird demonic cult people. You know, it was everywhere of all sides. It was definitely a massive media spectacle, right? And then, long story short, the FBI tried to end the standoff by shooting some tear gas into the building, which resulted in a fire starting. And there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about this too, that they you know, deliberately started this fire and etc., or else the Branch Davidians started the fire and it was more of a Jonestown kind of thing, you know. Maybe we'll do a stream on this. Maybe we'll do a stream on, you know, the Branch Davidians one day, and then like Jonestown, and then other like wacky religious like cults and shit. That might be a good stream. Anyway, so yeah, fire starts in the compound, and somewhere around 80 people end up getting killed. You know, 80 Branch Davidians, including children. Unfortunately, there were lots of children in the place too, and that really, really, really pissed a lot of people off on the right wing. You know, because they saw these people as Christians, even though according to many right-wing Christians, these people were actually in a sort of a cult kind of thing. But that didn't matter. You know, to the militia people, right, tend to all usually follow a sort of a paleo-conservative, far right-wing libertarian worldview. You know, that's usually how their politics go. And according to this, this was like just like Ruby Ridge. This was the federal government overstepping their bounds, and the FBI murdering children, shit like that. Which, you can make that argument. It's like, yeah, maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe they should have just waited them out, right? And this is actually part of the reason why, for example, 20 years later, when you had things like the Bundy Ranch standoff, they didn't escalate. They learned, the FBI learned their lessons from Waco, for example, what could go wrong. And this is one of the reasons why they didn't like charge in and, try to arrest everybody, because it would end up in a massacre like it did at Waco, and it would just escalate and cause even more right-wing extremists and stuff. So it's like, yeah, for their part, the FBI learned their lesson after this, but still, I mean, I don't think anybody can look back at Waco and say that mistakes were not made. Because they were, right? At the same time, I think the same criticism that I gave to Ruby Ridge applies to Waco as well. What did they fucking think was going to happen? Imagine you're David Koresh or whatever. What did you think is going to happen? Did you think that the fucking FBI was going to go away? Do you think the ATF and the FBI and the cops are just going to leave? And, you just go back to normal? Obviously fucking not. And every, minute that they let that standoff go on, they were putting all of their people in danger even further. Women, children, everybody who were there. So, yeah, they deserve just the same amount of fucking blame for this as the FBI does. Let's keep that in mind, right? At any given moment, they could have surrendered, prevented this loss of life. So, yeah, I don't blame only the FBI and the ATF for getting all those people killed. Let's not forget that those fucking people, had plenty of opportunity to surrender. And it's one thing if you're like, I mean, that's the thing. If your family is there, it's different. It's like, okay, if you're talking about bank robbers or keeping hostages, shit like that, that's one thing, right? These are people there with their families. And that was another thing that people were concerned about. It's like, well, maybe they're like keeping the children as hostages. Like, they didn't know, right? They didn't know if this guy Koresh was sort of one of those insane, charismatic, charismatic cult leader types who would order everybody to drink the poison Kool-Aid. They were afraid of that happening too. And that was like kind of the rumor that, oh, he might fucking murder everyone there. We got to do something. And so it's like you got to look at it from different angles like that. But anyway, it's safe to say that, there's plenty of blame for what happened there to go around on all sides, right? Anyway, this really supercharges the militia movement. People lose their fucking minds over this, and then you have, lots of little incidents all through. You have all these little militia groups, and essentially there's a militia group in every state by this point, and surprisingly, the state with the largest number of militia groups is actually California. Believe it or not. I mean, you would think it'd be Texas or like Montana or some shit. California actually has the largest number of militia groups. That's kind of crazy. Even up to today. Even today, California has more than, I mean, I guess it makes sense because California has, more people living here. But, anyhow, so, yeah. So you have this sort of the militia movement up into the early mid-90s is sort of at its peak at this point, and there's tens of thousands of people in some of these groups. There was the National Association of Militias or something, I think is what they were called, claimed at one point that there were 35,000 people around the country associated with militias, but we have no way of knowing one way or another how many exactly that is. It's an estimate, but still, it's a shitload. That's how many, right? And then, and there were little incidents here and there of a militia guy would shoot a cop or something like that, or, would get busted committing fraud, that kind of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then, there was another standoff that occurred, right? And this was called the Montana Freemen. And This is kind of very similar, actually, to the Bundy Ranch standoff. Right. This is one of the early examples of, militia people kind of engaging in the same sort of shenanigans that we would see that we would see 20 years later with Bundy Ranch. Right. And who the Montana Freemen were, they were a group of, right-wing tax protester types, right? And they lived on a farm in Jordan, Montana. And what it was is that this farm was owned by two guys, Ralph Clark and Emmett Clark, right? And their farm gets repossessed. So, but they refuse to leave. They're, the same way that, Ammon Bundy and Cliven Bundy, like, basically fucking, and Cliven Bundy, exactly, in the same way that they kind of refuse to pay their federal grazing fees, right? These guys just decided that, the law of the United States doesn't apply to us anymore, and we're just gonna not leave our ranch, and come make us, right? And they had a group of roughly 10 to 15 sort of militia member guys who just hung out with them and occupied this farm, right? Which they renamed the Justice Township. They renamed their farm and the surrounding land as the Justice Township. And they kind of, said, we're going to make our own country here, and they proclaim their own sovereignty. And so a lot of the sovereign citizen shit kind of mixes in with these guys too. And for 2 years, they sort of just gave a huge middle finger to the authorities, didn't pay any taxes, lived on land that was repossessed, right? And nobody wanted to do anything about it because they were armed to the teeth, right? And in the meantime, the way these guys met, so they met a guy named Leroy Schweitzer, who eventually kind of became the leader of the group, right? And he was a con man and a former crop duster. That was his was his job, one of those guys that flies around in an airplane and drops fucking pesticides on corn and shit. That was his thing, right? And they met this guy. So Emmett Clark and Ralph Clark and another guy named William Stanton was involved. They meet Leroy Schweitzer at a seminar they attended from a group called We the People, who was also kind of a sort of another semi-early militia group. They were like a tax protesting kind of group. Although I don't think We the People ever became like a full-fledged militia. Like they didn't engage in drills and stuff. Like firearms training and drills waiting for fucking the Boogaloo or whatever. At least not that I could find out. I don't know, maybe they did. Anyway, a little note on We the People. Right, We the People was an anti-government sort of, group of con artists. And what they did is that they claimed that they won a lawsuit against the federal government for $600 trillion. And what they would do is they would go around and they'd have seminars. And they would basically tell people, if you can get, part of this $600 trillion, right? Like they claimed this lawsuit was against the government for $600 trillion because the federal income tax was unconstitutional, right? And that's a conspiracy theory on the right wing that goes back all the way to when, whatever amendment it was that created the federal income tax, And the idea behind that conspiracy theory was that not all of the states at that time ratified that amendment, which is, so they go, well, it's, taxation without representation because these numbers of states, didn't ratify that, which is bullshit because you don't need all of the states to ratify an amendment, right? All the states don't have to, ratify an amendment. You only need a certain number. The number escapes me at this moment, but, so, yeah, the income tax is constitutional. Put it that way. So that was one of the reasons why, assorted right-wing types don't want to pay income tax because they have this bullshit conspiracy theory claiming that it's like that it's unconstitutional to begin with, which is just not true. Anyway, so these con artist assholes went around bilking people out of $300, claiming that they could get like, you know, large payouts from the $600 trillion, and they would like sell these kits that had phony money orders in them, right? So that you could, and then people would actually take this shit and they would try to like pay off their debts and stuff, pay off their mortgages, that kind of thing, with these fake money orders. And it's like, I don't know why people think, you know, like you could pay off your, you know, $180,000 mortgage, for example, with like some shit that you got from fucking some random moron for $300. Like, I don't know why people believe, why anybody would fall for that, but apparently people did. So yeah, that's what We the People was, you know. And the guy that started We the People, his name was Roy Schwasinger, eventually went to jail. And, you know, after collecting $2 million in ill-gotten scammy gains from right-wing dopes and desperate people also who needed, you know, who were looking for help with their bills and shit and fell for this con man's bullshit. You got to remember, you know, people who fall for scams, usually people who fall for scams are people who are desperate and who need, you know, who are looking for any kind of like anything to save them. So lots of people who were like poor and shit needed the money. You know, people who were going to get evicted from their houses bought into this fucking crap and got scammed out of their money by this fucking con artist guy. Right? So anyway, that guy eventually went to prison. Right? That's how these guys met, by the way. So, you know, they met at a seminar of people who were, you know, for a scam artist that was like ripping people off, right? And just to show that the apple never falls that far from the tree, during the 2 years that the Montana Freemen were held up in their compound, you know, in their farm, right? What they did is they would hold classes on basically how to rip people off, right? That was their, you know, that was their fucking like income there. So they would hold classes on how to write fake checks, you know. They would, you know, the same kind of thing that you got out of the We the People thing, right? How to make fake money orders. One of the schemes was on how to write checks for more than the amount and then get a refund afterwards. Basically check fraud. Shit that you mostly can't do nowadays because of electronic, you know, verification on checks. You can't really do this kind of thing now because checks, you know, they go, you know, when you go and you write a check, they put it through that little thing and it goes through the, you know. Back in the day, you couldn't do that. Back in the day, it took 2 weeks for a check to, like, clear, right? So you could pass a phony check off at a store, for example, buy some shit with it, and then 2 weeks later, the check bounces, but, you know, they wouldn't know it was fake until then. That's mostly been eliminated nowadays. There's certain places where you can still do it, but anyway, you know, so this is how these guys were making money, right? And basically fucking running scams out of their, you know, out of their fucking foreclosed on farm that, you know, they were just refusing to fucking vacate, right? Selling another thing that they would sell is like anti-government literature, that kind of thing. So, anyway, and one other thing that the Montana Freemen would do that a lot of militia groups at this time also did is that they would put fake liens on property, right? So kind of mixes in with what we were talking about last week, right? With the sovereign citizens. Like they would go around, they would find, like, say, a judge that had ruled against them, you know, in their foreclosure case or whatever, and put a lien on his house, claiming that they own his house and that, you know, and he has to pay off this lien or whatever. And what that does is, even when it's fake, it screws up people's credit. So that in and of itself is a crime. You can't put a phony lien on a house that you have no fucking claim to. Right, to my knowledge at least. I don't know, I think it's a crime. So they would do this and it would fuck up people's credit and just basically ruin their lives and shit. And it was like, it was a way of harassment, number one. And number two, it was a way of trying to, like, steal people's property. So this all ends up being fraud that, you know, this is all fraud, right? And then, apparently they also would engage in armed robbery as well. There was a case where a news crew was driving around on the outskirts of their land, and these guys pulled them over and at gunpoint robbed a news crew from ABC TV News, um, you know, and stole $66,000 worth of television equipment from them. So yeah, these guys were essentially fucking, like, criminals, right? And it's kind of like where that line between, like, a militia group, a hate group, and a fucking straight up gang sort of blurs. Criminal enterprise, right? So the FBI, what they did is they lured a couple of these guys away from the compound, including, what's his name, Schweitzer. That was his name. Leroy Schweitzer, who was the leader. Kind of lured him out and then arrested him, right? And then this results in another standoff, an 81-day standoff this time, with the remaining 10 or so Montana freemen held up in this farm, and between the FBI, keep in mind this is like a year after Waco. So it's like you have Ruby Ridge standoff there, you have Waco standoff that results in, like, fucking, 80 people getting killed, and then, like, less than a year later you have another standoff, and this one goes for, like, this is after a 2-year wait, So, by this point, however, so eventually all these guys get busted and they go to prison. They all got busted. And I think it was the first conviction for domestic terrorism in the history of the country was from the Montana freedmen. The guy Schweitzer himself, the leader, eventually went to prison for fraud and armed robbery and threats and having illegal weapons and all this shit. And he died in prison at the age of 73. So, at least that one had a good outcome, and nobody ended up getting killed during that particular incident, By this point, it's 1995, and the Oklahoma City bombing happens. So I'm sure you guys have all heard about that. Just I won't talk too much about the Oklahoma City bombing. But the main perpetrator, Timothy McVeigh, of course, was involved in the militia movement as well. He claimed that he did the bombing in retaliation for Waco. So, the Waco Branch Davidian, siege, right? So that was his motive, according to him. Was in revenge for Waco, right? And Timothy McVeigh was a white supremacist. He based the bombing off of the Turner Diaries, which, if you don't know about that, the Turner Diaries is basically it's a fiction book written by, I think his name is William Turner, and it's sort of like a blueprint on how to engage in a civil war, right? So whenever you hear about right-wingers talking about the Civil War, this is what they talk about. They talk about how, the cities will be isolated, and then everybody, because it's not so much the Second Civil War, according to the right-wing fringe, right, it won't be a North versus South dynamic. It'll be a left versus right, conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat kind of thing. And they have this fantasy in their heads that the major cities, which according to them are cesspools of liberalism and whatnot, because non-white people live in cities. Well, what the strategy is that they're just going to cut off all the cities, and then everybody will run out of food, and then it'll just be pandemonium, and then, gangs of black people are going to run around and, rape and murder everybody, and there'll be cannibalism and shit like that. Right? That's the plan. That comes out of the Turner Diaries. essentially. There's some other things about how they, in the Turner Diaries, how they're gonna like bomb buildings and hijack federal, gold shipments and shit like that. To be honest, I haven't really read the entire thing. I do have it, believe it or not. I have I downloaded a copy of it years ago, but I've never actually read the entire thing. Maybe I should read it so I know what I'm talking about. But that's pretty much it. It's essentially a blueprint on how to engage in a right wing civil war. From the insane Jesus crowd perspective, right? And that's what he So he was highly influenced by that. Of course, the Oklahoma City bombing, resulted in 168 people getting killed. And I was also in high school when this happened. Actually, no, I was shortly out of high school. And in fact, I think I graduated that year. I could tell you this too. That was, it was a media spectacle beyond every media spectacle. Like, I think the only thing that even compares to the Oklahoma City bombing is, of course, 9/11. When it comes to the coverage on it, when it comes to how that it affected American politics and just general discourse and attitudes in this country when it comes to extremism and all of that. And the Oklahoma City bombing kind of resulted, it was sort of the beginning of the end for the militia movement. Because up until that point, there was debate as to, should militia movements be validated? There was actually like a legitimate debate about, maybe we should have citizen patrols and, the stuff like that. And maybe the Constitution actually does say that there should be a well-regulated militia that doesn't have to be the, National Guard. It can be normal people, and, and how come we can't, and stuff like that, right? And it's like, well, it should be allowed if you're just, a group of like-minded individuals, as long as you're not breaking any laws, blah, 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 right? That was actually a legitimate debate back then. Oklahoma City happens, public turns against militias. By that point, then it was like, okay, these people are fucking domestic terrorists, right? Fuck this shit, And hey, by the way, aren't they all a bunch of fucking Nazis anyway? Yes, you know what I mean. That's what happened after, and it was fast how quick all of the militia people and all that, how fast it started disappearing, right? How quickly politicians and stuff who were playing footsie with these people suddenly turned their back on them. Nothing like a nice terrorist attack that kills, hundreds of innocent people to suddenly light the fire under the ass of the American politic. Especially like Republicans. Republicans like really went over and beyond out of their way to try to separate themselves from militia movements, because a lot of them were fucking kind of playing with these people. They were kind of like, I wouldn't say in bed with them, but they were trying to use them. They were trying to turn them into a voter base, is what they were trying to do. The same way that, I guess you could say Donald Trump somewhat succeeded in that, in turning the fringe right wing into an actual legitimate voter base. Like that was kind of what they were trying to do. They were trying to create a MAGA sort of movement back in the 90s, right? So it's funny. The more this shit changes, the more it stays the same, right? Like, seriously. Anyway, and so yeah, that's what they were. A lot of politicians were trying to manipulate these guys into, basically a voter base, and that quickly disappeared. Very, very quickly disappeared after Oklahoma City. Anyway, so, but yeah, just remember, Timothy McVeigh was very much into, militia stuff. He was a white supremacist. His co-conspirator, Terry Nichols, also, white supremacist guy. He was into this stuff too. He renounced his citizenship in 1992. Terry Nichols. He followed far-right conspiracy theories, things like, Posse Comitatus style anti-tax conspiracy stuff, and things about the Jewish New World Order, that kind of thing. That was all very much, influence on these guys. They didn't seem to be affiliated with any particular militia group, but yeah, just read up about these guys, man. They were definitely drinking the Kool-Aid. So that kind of knocked it down there for a little while, right? And things, the militia movement sort of quieted down after Oklahoma City. They didn't go away, right? It never actually truly went away completely, but membership in militias definitely fell off a cliff by that point for a good 5 years. And then, 9/11 happens, right? And 9/11 was sort of the death knell for the first iteration of militia groups from the 90s, right? Because it split them ideologically, right? And Dynacat, William Luther Pierce, published by the pseudonym Andrew McDonald. Okay, you're right, Dynacat. So I was completely wrong about that. Like I said, maybe I should read it so that way I know what I'm talking about. I actually do have a copy of it digitally here. But anyway, you're totally right. You're totally right. I was wrong. I'm talking out my ass. Anyhow, So 9/11 was sort of the kind of death knell for the first iteration of the militia movement, right? And the reason why is because up until that point, they were very much an anti-government sort of movement. But the claim was that they were there to protect the states from all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? Well, what's a bigger enemy than Islamic, terrorism, right? The kind of Islamic terrorism that we saw on 9/11. What's a bigger enemy to the state than that? Okay. So it sort of split them, where one side of the militia groups were saying, 9/11 is, we have to be patriots and we have to support the government in this, new war on terror. The other half went the even wackier, route, claiming that 9/11 was an inside job and all that stuff, right? So that kind of split these guys up, and, they sort of went away during the Bush years. You didn't really hear very much from militia groups during the Bush years, right? And that's a phenomenon that, can't really be understated, because they only really seem to be active when a Democrat is in the White House for some reason, right? And it's because during the Bush years and later during the Trump years, they see, one of the major problems, one of the major things that motivates militia groups is also, illegal immigration. That is a very, very big motivator for these people. And when you have a Republican president, they kind of tend to calm down because they see official policies getting enacted that they can support, Although during the Bush years, you did kind of see these sort of citizen, like, border patrol type groups, right? That would go around. Like, one of them was called the, what the fuck were they called? The Minutemen Project. And another one was Ranch Rescue. Those are two sort of prominent groups that you saw during the Bush years that, they would go down to the border and harass people, shit like that. Try to take pictures of people crossing the border and harass them and deny them water, that kind of thing. So it's not like they went away, but they definitely quieted down a lot during the Bush years, right? And then Barack Obama becomes president. Barack Obama gets elected. And the militia people come back in force. And it's like, just to kind of show you, all the claims that, hey, race has nothing to do with it, right? Shit like that. this is sort of proof that, those are all lies. Race definitely does have something to do with it, because after the first black president, is elected, the right wing in this country loses its collective mind, and the militia people come out of the fucking woodwork, and suddenly we get the second wave of militia groups that, rise up during the Obama years. Things like the Oath Keepers is one. Another group was the Three Percenters. The Proud Boys, although the Proud Boys, I wouldn't call them a militia group per se. The Proud Boys are more of a fucking gang. Kind of talked about this at the beginning of the thing. They're more of a street fighting, like, just straight up fucking gang of hoodlums and shit that'll go, like, assault people, stuff like that. And militias don't really do that, But there is a big crossover. There are people who are also, example, who are in the Three Percenters, who are also fucking part of the Proud Boys. They definitely line up ideologically. That's for sure, But, for example, the Proud Boys never claim to be, like, there to protect people. No. There to protect businesses or whatever. They never gave a shit about any of that. All they want to do is go beat up commies. That's exactly that, and those are words from their own mouths. That's not me saying that. That's words from their own mouths. They'll say, "I just want to go beat up commies." I'm not even kidding. So I'm not really classifying them as a militia group. I'm classifying them as a fucking gang, right? Criminal gang. There's So these guys kind of came out of nowhere, like during the Obama years, and I just want to make a little side note that we do have sort of a direct line, because if you remember last week when we were talking about sovereign citizens, there was sort of a connection between sovereign citizen groups and pro-fascist groups from the 1930s and 40s, things like America First and, the Silver League, the silver shirts, those things. Some of those same people that were in those fascist groups started the first militia groups, right? We kind of have, they started the sovereign citizen movement, sorry. And some of those same people, cross over into militia groups. And we have sort of this not just an ideological, alignment between all these groups, but we actually have a sort of a roadmap of actual people who were in these pro-fascist groups from the 40s, things like America First, right? Or the Silver League, for example. And then who actually started militia groups in the 1980s. And then, militia groups today that have, are sort of the successors to those. So it's like, we have this sort of thoroughfare that goes from, pro-Nazi, pro-Axis fascist groups in the 40s all the way to, conservative culture warrior, violent militia groups in the fucking 2020s, and it's like you can trace it all the way back. Like, you could trace the evolution of these extremist groups go back to like fucking fascism, and that's what it all is, So anyway, I just thought that shit was interesting. Many of the same people who are involved in all this stuff, excuse me, many of the same people like either took inspiration from or were directly involved in the creation of these groups over the decades. Right. Okay. God, hand hurts. Jesus. All right, where are we at? We're at an hour. Okay. Let's go on here. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Oath Keepers here, because the Oath Keepers is probably one of the largest militia groups in the second wave here, right? And they were founded in 2009 by a guy named Elmer Stewart Rhodes III. So if you remember, 2009 was, right when Obama takes office, right? And suddenly all the Republicans out there remember that they don't like taxes. And so we had this big Tea Party movement. I don't know if you guys remember that. Like, literally, right when Obama takes takes office, the Tea Party movement gets formed because they don't like taxes, and we had this massive national, we had, God, what was it? We had something like $5 trillion in debt, right? So all the right-wingers are afraid that Obama's going to raise taxes in order to pay for the national debt. And so they all lose their minds and they form these Tea Party groups, right? And right around this time, this Oath Keeper group forms, right? They actually kind of started, they started a little bit earlier, like the main guy that ran it, Elmer Stewart Rhodes, he was very much like basically against Hillary Clinton. That was his thing. He really, really, really didn't like Hillary Clinton, right? So a little bit about this guy, Elmer Stewart Rhodes. He was a former U.S. paratrooper, right? And then he went on to actually go to Yale. So he's a Yale graduate. And then in 2008, he worked on Ron Paul's campaign. So highly conservative guy, right? Sort of a, libertarian, far-right extremist kind of dude. And he really, 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 really hated Hillary Clinton, right? And so the Oath Keepers were sort of formed with that in mind. The idea behind the Oath Keepers is that it's made up of currently serving. Well, this is the quote from their website, right? They're made up of currently and formerly serving military, police, and first responders who pledge to fulfill the oath all military and police take to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? But, it's that defending the Constitution part where, this whole thing falls apart because they seemingly want to defend the Constitution from insane, wacky right-wing conspiracy theories. And they think somebody like Hillary Clinton is, was going to become a fucking dictator. Right? So, I keep mentioning that because he wrote an actual, before he started the, this guy, I'll just call him Rhodes, that's his last name. This guy Rhodes, before he started the Oath Keepers, he wrote this blog post, which was published in a magazine, SWAT magazine, which is like a law enforcement kind of, magazine. It's sort of like Kung Fu. You ever read Kung Fu or Black Belt magazine? It's like that, but for cops. People who like to pretend that they're police officers who can read this magazine and masturbate to pictures of AR-15s and shit. That's what SWAT was. I don't even know if SWAT's still around. Anyway, he writes this blog post article talking about how Hillary Clinton is, going to be a fucking dictator and she's going to take away your guns and blah, 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 and all this other bullshit. And in that blog post, he essentially lays out what eventually what the Oath Keepers would be. According to him, it would be people that, would fight against the government. When they say all enemies, foreign and domestic, what they're really talking about is the government, of course. If the government comes and tries to take your guns away, right? If they, try to, raise taxes, right? Stuff like that. Because remember, they're all libertarians and shit like that, so taxes are thievery to these people. That kind of thing, If the government tries to, round people up and put them in concentration camps because they're Christian, that kind of thing. This is what they're going to defend people from, right? But that was, essentially his reason for doing it. Another quote, because it also kind of it kind of relies on this myth that right-wingers have that the reason for the Second Amendment is to defend yourself from the government. This is sort of a myth that you get from right-wingers, this idea that an armed populace would stop, would be able to stop an army, right? And that, for example, if the Jewish people were armed in the 1940s, then the Holocaust never would have happened. Which is just not true. It's not true at all. I mean, there was armed resistance to the Nazis, right? And, for the populace. And it just, there were, guerrilla, I guess you would call them, freedom fighters or whatnot in Paris and stuff like that. And in some of the ghettos. And they just, it wasn't sufficient in order to stop an army. And it's sort of like, an armed, it's basically like, that's kind of like a right-wing talking point that they like to talk about. It's a fantasy. There's no fucking way. If you just get like a group of, if you just arm normal, ordinary people, they don't have the training and, the discipline and the training in order to go up against a professional army. And not only that, but they also don't have the equipment because, your Peasley little fucking pistol or hunting rifle, or even if you have an AR-15, that's not going to do shit when you have like a patrol of army guys, riding around in armored vehicles with fucking, body armor and stuff and spotters and satellites and shit telling people where they are. And, it's just not going to happen. People in Iraq were fucking armed, and did that stop like the United States Army? No. Right? It's what stops an army? Another army. Like in, say, fucking Vietnam, for example. Those weren't just, the Viet Cong was not just like simple farmers armed with fucking hoes and rakes and pitchforks and shit. They actually had like machine guns and stuff, and they had tactics. They used guerrilla tactics and that kind of thing. And even then, it was like, how many South Vietnamese, how many Vietnamese people actually died during that war? We don't even know. I mean, fucking thousands upon thousands upon thousands. And it was like this war of attrition that eventually just ground down the American forces until they finally had to, like, until the will to fight wasn't there anymore, then they left. That was basically it, right? Then they eventually pulled out when shit started going south eventually, So it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy that these people, that you get it from right-wingers all over the place. This idea that if I just have my my shotgun and my AR-15 or whatever, then when the evil government comes and they want to throw me in prison for whatever because I won't take the mark of the beast vaccine or whatnot or whatever the fuck they're talking about, then we can get some armed resistance and we could stop the commies from taking over. And it's complete and total fucking bullshit. But anyway, that's what the Oath Keepers are. That's why they, that's why they say, and you got to remember that too, when they say uphold the Constitution, they mean uphold the Constitution for themselves. They don't really give a shit, for example, if, say, for example, a cop blows away a black person who's in his car with both his hands on the wheel. They don't give a shit about that, Or if another cop sits on the neck of somebody for 9 minutes and strangles them to death, they don't give a shit about that either. They don't care about any of that stuff, right? They only care about, themselves and their fucking precious fucking weapons, right? Their overgrown toys, that's all they really give a fuck about. That's all they really mean when they say uphold the Constitution. They mean uphold the shit they care about in the Constitution. Let's keep that in mind. Anyway, but yeah, that was the motivation behind them, claiming that they were going to defend the country from a totalitarian leader. Just they thought that leader was going to be Hillary Clinton, which was a joke. And anyway, by the way, you can get all this stuff from the Oath Keepers official blog, which is funny. As a side note, their official blog is like a fucking free one that you get from Blogspot. Which is like, I'm not knocking that because I have one of those too. I actually do have a Blogspot blog that I never update. But, this is like a nationwide organization with tens of thousands of members. You think they could spend a little bit of money on a proper website instead of using like the free shit that Google gives you. Anyway, in 2016, they claimed to have 35,000 members, but, who knows how much that actually is. I've seen online some estimates put them as low as 2,000, you know. But I don't know. They do seem to be all over the place, though. They have they were there in 2014 for the Clive and Bundy standoff. You know, the ranch standoff. They were there, and then they were also there again when you know, at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge when Clive and Bundy's sons went and took that building over. You know, the Oath Keepers went to help them there. Keep that in mind, you know, that means those people were breaking the law, which means that they were, you know, Clive and Bundy and his sons were breaking the law when they did that. They were not upholding the Constitution. So, you know, they're just kind of another example of what upholding the Constitution means to these people. They, during the standoff at the ranch, I mean, not at the ranch, at the wildlife refuge, the guy Rhodes, the leader of the Three Percenters, claimed that he had intelligence that the Obama administration was going to destroy them all with a drone strike. Right? That's some funny shit. There's actually video on YouTube of people claiming that, like, at that standoff, because there's still video of those people that were at the standoff, who they were uploading it with their phones at that time. And I remember seeing a video of a woman that was at one of these, and they're in this parking lot. And I talked a little bit about this last week, and she's like hysterical, claiming that a drone strike is going to come and destroy us at any minute. And apparently this was the same thing, right? And for the record, no, Obama did not drone strike the Oath Keepers. That never happened. Also, this guy Rhodes has claimed he's threatened civil war several times over the years. In 2009, to begin with, when it looked like Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee, you know, he threatened civil war if she won. And then again in 2014 for the Clive and Bundy standoff at the federal building, he threatened civil war then. And then also again in 2016. If Hillary Clinton won the election, he claimed that there would be a civil war there. And then lately, in the latest time that this guy did this was in 2019 with the basically forcing. There was a thing in 2019 about forcing legislators to work on cap and trade legislation. I don't know why that would cause civil war. You know, I guess they're really, really, really in support of fucking you know, global warming. That even trying to pass a law to do something about it means that they got to declare civil war. I don't know why that happened. And then also the same guy, he also tweeted about there being a civil war in 2020 after Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 people. If you remember that, like Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 people and killed 2 of them. He claimed that was going to cause a civil war. Right. And then also when Michael Rienal shot somebody, you know, he was the one guy that a BLM protest who was claimed to be an anti-fascist who shot someone, and then the police just blew him away. I don't know if you remember Michael Rienal. You know, I did a stream about that. You know, he shot a guy at a protest, claimed it was in self-defense, and then instead of arresting him, the cops just fucking executed him, and nobody did anything about it. You know, yeah, that apparently got the Oath Keepers to threaten civil war as well. And they're still very much active. You know, they would show up at Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that, and you know, they would say that we're here to defend people. You know, we're here to defend the right-wing protesters usually. And then they'll do things like they'll stand in front of buildings like saying, yeah, we're protecting this 7-Eleven from getting burned down by the evil BLM. Shit like that. They were also there at the January 6th Capitol insurrection, which is a pattern we're going to see a lot with these people. So far, 12 members of the Oath Keepers have been charged with crimes relating to the Capitol 6 insurrection, conspiracy, and you know, things like that. illegal entry, right, vandalism, that kind of thing. So yeah, still very much active, and still very dangerous. To this point, there hasn't been any instances of the Oath Keepers actually murdering anyone that I know of that I could find. But when you go to a protest armed to the teeth, standing around, it's only a matter of time before some shit happens and somebody gets shot. So, and kind of shows there too. They're really what they stand for. I mean, they were there at the Capitol insurrection. I don't see how that translates into upholding the Constitution. Just want to reiterate that, because this is what the defenders of these people will say, is that they're there to defend the Constitution. They're trying to root out corruption, blah, 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 blah. That's complete bullshit. That's why I keep repeating that over and over. It's bullshit. They're not there to defend the Constitution. Right? They're picking and choosing the parts they want to support, because they're fucking right-wing lunatics. Anyway. So those guys are pretty big. Let's see. Yeah, Dynacat Loves Me. In his interview, he claimed he was not Antifa, but he agreed with them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Michael Rienal said that he wasn't he is the closest thing that you could get to an anti-fascist who's actually murdered somebody. Because up until that point, there's been essentially no murders, in the last 25 years attributed to anti-fascist people, So, but yeah, he is the one example, this entire, time of someone who was on the left wing who was guilty of murdering somebody at a protest, and even he, and he claimed it was self-defense. The thing about that is that we'll never know. We'll never know, because the cops didn't arrest him. They just killed him. And it was everybody forgot about it. I think that was a big fucking, travesty of justice right there. And we'll never know what actually fucking happened, because he's dead. And, it's fucked up. Anyway, almost done. Let's go through. There's a couple of more guys I want to talk about here before we'll move on to, comments. Hang on. Let me get some water. Alright. So another prominent group out there of militia people in this second wave of militias is the 3%ers. Right. These are the guys that have, it's basically their symbol is a circle with 3 Roman numerals in it. And the thing behind their name is that it's this idea that during the American Revolution, only 3% of the populace supported the revolution, and they were able to beat Great Britain. That's the theory behind their name. In real life, it was probably closer to 25% of the population, right? So, not exactly accurate there. They were founded in 2008 by a guy named Michael Brian Vanderboe, who was a member of a militia group in Alabama back in the 90s. So, there you go. Just another thoroughfare, right? Linking the first iteration of militia groups with the second, right? So this guy, Vanderboe, a little bit about him. In his youth, he actually seemed to be a little bit of a leftist. Seemed like he was into left-leaning politics in his youth. And he was part of the, for example, the Students for a Democratic Society, and another group like the Socialist Workers' Party, right? Who were two pretty prominent groups back in the day, So he was, kind of a left-winger, and then what happened is that he read this book called The Road to Serfdom, which is written by, I don't have the guy who wrote it. Oh, here it is. Friedrich August von Hayek. And basically, this guy's Austrian economist, right? And The Road to Serfdom is essentially that, just bullshit. It's just bullshit, claptrap, you know, Austrian economic crap trap that you know, claims that you know, anti-socialist alarmist horseshit. That's basically this book. You know, claiming that all the world's problems can be solved through the free market, and socialists, you know, if you allow socialist policies, then it's going to result in totalitarianism and blah 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 blah. So apparently, the guy reads this horseshit book, and that turns him from you know, supporting left-leaning politics to right-leaning politics. Turns him into a fucking libertarian, you know, right? And yeah. Anyway, so he gets involved with you know, militia movements in the 90s. He's done things like supported conspiracy theories related to the Oklahoma City bombing and stuff like that. And the Three Percenters have been there. They supported Cliven Bundy at the standoff also, you know, at the ranch standoff, and then also the wildlife refuge standoff. They were there. They also showed up at the Capital City insurrection on January 6th. They were there as well. In particular, one of the guys that was photographed at the Capitol riot is named Robert Giswin from Colorado. And apparently this guy is also part of the Proud Boys. So just to kind of show that there is crossover between all these groups, right? You know, the very ideologically minded groups. And, you know, a lot of the people that are in one, you know, they all sort of mix together, right? And most disturbingly, relating to the Capital City riot, is that there's a guy named Chris Miller who was he's a Republican member of the Illinois General Assembly, right? Those are the guys that during, like, say you have a convention, stuff like that, they're the ones that decide who the electors are going to be, you know. And they vote in caucuses and that kind of thing. So it's basically like a low-level Republican operative, right? And he was there at you know, the Capital City, right? Capital City insurrection. And on his truck, there's a big decal of the Three Percenters. So just want to actually have a picture of that. Here's the guy's truck. Let me just open up this, turn on my monitor. And you see this right here? See this little circle with the 3 on it? That's the Three Percenter logo. So this dude is an actual, like, you know, operative with the Republican Party, right? In, you know, Illinois there. And, yeah, nice big round, you know, decal right there on his fucking truck. So let me just go back down here. I lost my place. Where was I? Okay. And, of course, for his part, he claims that he didn't know what that sticker was for. You know, it's like, why would you put a fucking sticker on your truck if you don't know what it's for? Obviously, the fucking guy's lying. The thing about Chris Miller is that he's actually married, to U.S. Representative Mary E. Miller from Illinois. So, yeah, the spouse of a congressman, you know, is fucking involved with this, like, right-wing fucking anti-government militia group, you know, revolutionary militia group that is, like, trying to fucking essentially overthrow the United States government the same day that he's there. You know, that's kind of disturbing. Kind of shows you that, you know, that these groups aren't as fringe as people think. That's the thing. You know, you see these things in the news, and it's like the way they present it like these people are fucking part of some, like, secret underground terrorist organization like Cobra. You know what I mean? Like G.I. Joe and Cobra. Like, that's how they present these groups, you know. Oh, they're part of the Three Percenter groups, you know, and there's this, and it's like, no, they're not as underground as everybody thinks. Not when you have fucking politicians, like, supporting these people. Not when it's like the spouse of a fucking, like, congressperson is involved with these fucking people. No, that's not underground. That's fucking mainstream. All right. So anyway, for their part, so the original group of three percenters is actually now called Three Percenters Original, TTPO is what they're called. Three Percenters Original, because now there's all these affiliated three percenter groups all over the country. And for their part, the leader of the Three Percenters basically threw all the people that were at the capital city insurrection, threw them all under the bus. He dissolved their local chapter of the Three Percenters and claimed that he never knew them. Although they were claiming that he was in contact with them the whole time and he supported their actions. So there you go. Kind of like little weasels, like all or rats all abandoning a sinking ship. And I'm getting the impression from all of this that the capital city insurrection is having the same effect on these people that the Oklahoma City bombing had. You know, it's sort of like this is a wake-up call to people that holy shit, if we don't do something about these fucking insane people, that they're gonna fuck up the country. Right? And although people, not 168 people didn't die at the capital city insurrection, it was only about 5 or so. Still, it's being, I think, what I'm seeing, and this is just purely my own observation, right? From what I'm seeing, it has a lot of these groups sort of panicked, right? Even 4 months later, after all this shit happened, they're still a little panicked, and they all kind of went into damage control mode, and were all too eager to operate, and cooperate with authorities. Even groups like the Proud Boys, for example, quickly disavowed all the people that they had at this insurrection, and so it's like, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's like, okay, they sort of understood they overstepped their bounds, and then maybe a lot of these groups will fucking finally disband and go away. But I wouldn't doubt it. I would not, and I wouldn't count on it, actually, is what I meant to say. I wouldn't count on it because, that's what we thought after Oklahoma City. We thought we were done with this shit. And it's like, no, if history shows anything, it shows that it's just gonna they're all just gonna lay low for a little while, and then they'll come back in a few years. So one more group, and I was debating whether or not to talk about these guys or not, because I don't really think they're a militia so much, but this would be the Boogaloo Boys. They're more of a movement, right? So, although people have used the word militia, and they kind of seem to fit the bill for the militia somewhat, the thing about the Boogaloo Boys is that they're very loosely organized. They're not really militia groups tend to be very, very highly organized, and they'll have chapters, and they'll have clearly defined leaders and stuff, because they're usually paramilitary type organizations, right? Militia groups, right? They're usually, there's a clear leadership, and because that's what they sort of style themselves after, a well-regulated militia, right? And the Boogaloo Boys aren't really like that. They're more of a movement. They're more of and it's funny because, they're a movement that started on fucking 4chan. Alright, that's where the Boogaloo guys came from. So who are we talking about? Well, Boogaloo people, they're those sort of right-wing insane people that you see wearing fucking Hawaiian t-shirts, right? All the time. Like, if you ever, and these guys were at the capital city fucking insurrection as well. You'll see them wearing Hawaiian shirts. They're very anti-government, right? They started on 4chan, and the reason why they're called Boogaloo Boys is the Boogaloo is basically fucking the Second Civil War, and what they want, they're essentially accelerationists. The Boogaloo Boys. That accelerationists are people who want to accelerate the collapse of society. The collapse of society, the collapse of civilization, under the idea that we can then build something better from its ashes. So they want to see the United States collapse, and the banking systems collapse, and the international order collapse, and they want to see riots in the streets, and they want to see the government collapse, because then conceivably from what's remaining, we can go forth and build a better society, which according to them, would be a society without any black people in it. Right, because the Boogaloo Boys are also highly, highly racist. Right? Although, there are some people who have affiliated themselves in this movement who are coming from a left-winging perspective. Right? This is definitely true. You know, it seems like the majority of the Boogaloo people are far right-wing racist sort of types that are pretty much indistinguishable from, say, Proud Boys. Right? They're essentially Proud Boys with AR-15s, these people. But there are people that are affiliated with the Boogaloo movement that actually came from the left wing. For example, one of them was, let me just, let's see, what was the guy's name? The one guy who got shot, God, I didn't write him down. There was a guy that got shot at a BLM protest defending his girlfriend. From a car pulls up and this car is going to run over his girlfriend. His girlfriend was a black woman who actually was a paraplegic. Right, and I did a live stream about this dude and I can't remember his name. And apparently people were saying that, this guy was involved with the Boogaloo movement. So, take that for what you will. But it seems like the vast majority of them are far right-wing sort of like revolutionary lunatics. And their whole gig is that they want to start the second Civil War. And it's the same sort of pattern that we were talking about earlier today. That same sort of pattern where, they have the fantasy that that everybody, out in rural areas will band together and, lay siege to cities, isolate cities, and will prevent, shipments of food and fuel. And you guys can't even see what I'm drawing. I'm drawing down here. And will prevent shipments of food and gasoline and all that other stuff from getting into cities. And, why would they isolate cities? Because that's where all the black people live, right? That's where all the liberals live. That's where all the Jewish people live. They all live in cities. And which in real life is not exactly true either. There's plenty of black people and plenty of liberals and plenty of Jews who do not live in cities. But apparently, supposedly, I guess they would all just get, executed. Right. And the true Americans, the true patriots, the farmers and shit that live out in small towns, those are going to be the ones that, with their, fucking Peasley small arms, are going to lay siege to all the major cities in the country and prevent supplies from going in, so that there will be then the people in the cities will just turn on each other and murder and rape and kill and consume, and there'll be acts of fucking cannibalism and shit like that, and then it'll all collapse, and then from the ashes they can go and start their fucking ethnic state in the Pacific Northwest or whatever. Right? That's what we're fucking getting. And this is sounds like I'm being hyperbolic here. I'm not. That's exactly what these fucking people want. The majority of them, at least. Right? When it comes to the Boogaloo shit, go on 4chan and read about that stuff. That's exactly the kind of shit they talk about. White supremacy. They talk about the great fucking replacement, conspiracy theory. They talk about ethno-states, creating ethno-states, that kind of thing, So, these people, Boogaloo guys, were behind, there was a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. Those guys were affiliated with the Boogaloo movement. There was a couple of, actually, instances in California where people affiliated with this movement straight up fucking ambushed and murdered police officers. Killed 2 police officers and injured 4 more in attacks in Oakland and Santa Cruz in California, So, and then there were a couple of guys that were arrested at a George Floyd protest in South Carolina for trying to start a riot, which basically means going up trying to start fights, shit like that, So that's kind of scary shit. And so keep that in mind. And then they were also seen at the people wearing the Boogaloo fucking Hawaiian shirts and shit like that. Those guys were also seen at the Capital City insurrection as well. So very, very scary stuff. So anyway, getting really close to the end here. So yeah, it's very disturbing. Another thing to talk about is that I guess to end our prepared material here, militias are not unique to the United States. You do see them in other countries as well. They are a particular danger in the United States because they tend to, in the United States, be mainly an anti-government kind of force. I mean, you do see them in some places in Europe and, Canada and stuff like that. But in other countries, they don't really have access to firearms the same way they do in the United States. Not really. Right? So you don't really have the phenomenon of armed militias in, say, Germany, or fucking, Switzerland or something like that. You know what I mean? Or in Britain. You don't have, like, armed, compounds of armed, like, anti-government extremists, like, having standoffs with federal authorities for fucking weeks and months on end. That's some shit that only really seems to happen in the United States, right? And it's very just kind of disturbing, It's like I said before, there's this thorough line of where you can basically see the evolution of these groups from pro-fascist groups in the 1940s through to tax protesting groups in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, all the way up into like straight up fucking militias in the 90s and stuff. And now those militias are like, they're back and they're very firmly, the majority of them are highly right wing, right? And they're violent. They've been instances of them fucking murdering people, plotting kidnapping, plots to kidnap governors, shit like that. There was something around in the last 25 years, right? According to the FBI, there's somewhere around 900 plots from right-wing extremists, right? And this is not just militias, but right-wing extremists in general. So that includes things like, people like the Aryan Nations, KKK, stuff like that, right? But something like 900 like plots that would involve like kidnapping or murder or some other type of crime. Exactly about 329 deaths in the last 25 years, right? Since fucking Oklahoma City, right? 329 deaths attributed to right-wing groups in this country. Contrast that with the number of deaths attributed to Antifa, to anti-fascists, which is 0, right? Or if you count Michael Rienal, 1, which some people don't count him because, like we said in the chat there, he claimed to agree with Antifa, but to not be part of any Antifa movement. So I don't know, maybe you could say 1 from Antifa people versus 329 from the the wacky right-wing extremist side. So things that, that's just, to remember, these people are armed, these people are dangerous, right? They're ideologues, and they'll fucking, they're definitely something that we all need to be aware of, and we need to stand against, pretty dangerous stuff, and it's just another day in America living with, this is the result of, the bad side, right? This is the negative effect of having, a right to bear arms and a right to freedom of speech. It means that you're going to get crazy people who abuse those rights. So, anyway, let's see what we got here. Hand hurts, man. Getting pretty close to the end of this here. We're going to have to start on something else pretty soon. Let's talk about some comments here. What do we got? Let's see. Cody Course. My mom just said that Biden wants to keep the country locked down. At least she didn't say that Biden is acting on the Chinese government's behalf. Well, I don't think Biden, I don't know. I mean, I think your mother is probably not getting the best information. I don't think Biden wants to keep the country locked down, but I think he kind of has to, because you know, this is, I mean, the thing is, COVID-19 is not over with, right? Even though people are getting vaccinated, stuff like that. Um, you know, we are seeing a record number of vaccinations, which is good. And the number of deaths has started to kind of peter off a little bit, you know. So, whereas last year it was like, you know, we were getting 3,000 a day. Where are we at now? Let's take a look. Let's take a look. You know, let's say coronavirus stats. I've searched for it so many times it pops up in my you know, search history here. How many from, let's see, total cases, California. Oh, and that's just the entire. Let's take like a day. Let's see. Not that many in the United States. So April 7th, about 231 on April 7th, right? Let's go. What's the latest? April 30th, 41. The number of deaths have definitely petered down in the United States. Right, so, oh wait, no, I'm just looking at California. Let me just do show all. Okay, that seemed kind of low to me. I was like, wait a minute, 31? That's low as hell. Here we go, this is better. 695. Okay, so that's a little more like it. But, you know, let me actually show you what I'm looking at here. I'm looking at this. So if you take yesterday, you know, okay, 858 for yesterday. Pretty high. If you look at the peak that we had here, right around here, is roughly almost 4,000 a day. So you can see it's got, oh, that one is 4,000, January 3rd, 26th. You can see it's gone way, way down since, you know, the beginning of the year here. So that's still kind of a lot. 895, 7-day average, 695, but that's way better than where it was at, you know. Part of that reason why it's low is because there hasn't been any major holidays, you know, recently. Not a lot of traveling, right? Another reason why that's low is because a lot of people are getting vaccinated. Like, a lot, you know. We're doing something like 3 million people a day. I actually got my first vaccination myself last week. I got the Pfizer vaccine, so I go back in 2 weeks to get the second shot. If you haven't gotten it yet, be aware, like, that shit hurts. Holy fuck. It hurt. It really hurt. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it felt like I got, like, fucking punched in the arm, like, repeatedly for, like, 2 days. And now it's gone away. Now my arms are fine. But it really fucked me up pretty bad. My wife actually had some pretty bad symptoms. She had to call out of work the day after. She had, like, body aches and shit like that. But, you know, if that's what getting COVID feels like, and, you know, because that's what vaccines do, you know, you kind of get these side effects, right? And it's like a mild case of the, you know, of what the disease would feel like. And it's like, if that's like a mild case of COVID, like, I don't want to know what, like, a severe case of this shit is. So, you know. So, yeah, I'm happy to report that I'm halfway there. Got another 2 weeks, and then, you know, right. Of course, there is variants of the freaking virus now that you can get even when you are vaccinated, which is, like, great. Thanks, guys. This is what happens when people don't wear their fucking masks. You know, the goddamn virus mutates. Anyway, where were we? Oh, yeah, let's look at some more. Let's see. Lewis the Hedgehog. People say Waco could have been settled more peacefully, though. They say if you live on a ranch and there are no animals, you're in a cult. Yeah, Waco could have definitely been peacefully settled. That's the thing, is that, you know, the lessons have been learned from Waco, for sure. So if you notice, like, for example, during the Bundy Ranch standoff, you know, they didn't force a confrontation. They just waited them out. They should have done the same thing in Waco. They should have just waited them out, you know, but the thing is, it's like, well, they didn't know, right? And I remember this. I remember there was a lot of pressure from people to end it because people were afraid back then. Like, there was a lot of discussion about, like, because there were children there, you know, and there was discussion about, well, hey, he might be, like, abusing these children, which they found out that actually, yes, he was. You know, he was having, David Koresh was having sex with underage girls and stuff like that. But they were also afraid that the children were going to be used as hostages or shields. you know, that kind of thing. So there was all kinds of speculation running wild, you know, like it was definitely a media circus back then, and somebody made the wrong decision, and it's like it's kind of, you know, kind of messed up to just say it like that, but that's what it was. And you'll notice that in subsequent standoffs after that, the FBI does not, you know, the federal government does not force a confrontation anymore. They won't do it. You know, they'll just sit there and they'll just wait and wait and wait. You know, eventually they'll run out of food. And that's really what they should have done during Waco. They should have just surrounded them and then just laid siege to the place and not allow any food in or out. And then eventually, like, you know, they'll start negotiating. And that's what could have happened. And, you know, so yeah, of course, there's always a way to get it done better, you know. And I think just if there's anything positive that can be taken from that is that, you know, now they're very cognizant of preventing these types of massacres from happening again in the future. So, Adversary Fandom, I think the Turner Diaries use a pseudonym. Dynacat Turner Diaries is a 1978 novel by... Yeah, exactly. I completely didn't know what I was talking about there. Thanks, guys. Like I said, I've never actually read it. I've read like synopsises of it and shit like that. So I do have it on my... I have it on a CD somewhere. That it's funny. Years and years ago, I bought this sort of... you know, I used to be really into conspiracy theories back in the day, and I bought this CD from a guy on eBay called the Banned CD, and it had, like, you know, lots of conspiracy theory shit on it, and I was going through it, and it actually has a copy of the Turner Diaries, and it has Mein Kampf, and it has, like, all this other stuff. And that was actually one of the things that kind of got me to realize that, you know, conspiracy theory culture is, you know, has very much a racist component to it. Like, because I didn't know what any of this shit was back then. I mean, I think this was like at least 20 years ago when I bought this. Maybe like 2003, so almost 20 years ago. Because I didn't really know what any of this shit was, and I looked at it, I'm like, Turner Diaries, what the fuck is this? And then, you know, then I saw, like, it had also the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and, you know, and it had Mein Kampf. I knew what Mein Kampf was. I was like, wait, there's fucking, like, Nazi shit on this thing, you know? Because I wanted to read about, like, fucking, you know, I wanted to read about, like, Roswell aliens and stuff. You know? That's what I was into. I was into, like, Roswell aliens, and I was into, like, you know, like UFOs, that kind of thing. You know, and it was, and government cover-ups. That was the stuff I was interested in. And then I'm getting confronted with, like, all of this, like, fucking right-wing, like, you know, right-wing fucking white supremacist propaganda and shit. I still have the CD buried somewhere. Maybe I ought to, like, dig it up and read it just so I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, thanks, guys. Thank you for correcting me there. I appreciate that. Let's see. Dynacat Loves Me. In his interview, he claimed he was not Antifa, but he agreed with them. I think you're talking about Michael Rienal, right? Yeah, exactly. I think we went over that already. Let's see. Lewis the Hedgehog. They claim to be against the conspiracy, but are actually up to a conspiracy. I think, are you talking about Boogaloo Boys? 4chan, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. Ever heard of the IRA? The Irish Republican Army? Is that what you're talking about? The IRA? I mean, I've heard of them. I don't really know anything about them except that they would bomb people. I don't really know much of the history of that. You know, the Troubles in Ireland, right? I guess is what they called it. I know that there was like an extended bombing campaign. I remember actually, I went to England for my honeymoon, and when you walk around in like London, there's no trash cans anywhere. All of the trash cans are they're just a ring with a plastic bag under it. And apparently I asked somebody and I was like, why is that? And it was because the IRA used to put bombs inside of trash cans. And it was like the perfect hiding place. So that's why all the trash cans in London are see-through, you know? So, I don't know, maybe we'll do some research on that. That might be a good subject for a live stream, huh? Let's see. Data Cat, my second Pfizer shot laid me up for the next day. That means it worked. Yeah. I'm not looking forward to that, but, you know. Well, I am looking forward to it because I want to be able to go outside again and shit and not feel like I'm putting my fucking life into my hands. And I really want to go out to eat, you know? So, that's why I am looking forward to it. You know, I guess the first shot that you get gives you something like 60% protection or something, which is good, but still not good enough. I want 100. I want that 98%. You know what I mean? Before I feel comfortable, before I feel like, you know, confident that I'm not like putting myself at risk by going to a restaurant or some shit like that. You know. Anyway. One Life of Gauze. The Moderna version didn't hurt when I first got it, although my body was sore for a couple days. Dynacat. My first shot, my arm hurt a bit the next day, but not bad at all. Yeah, Dynacat loves me. Internet Research Agency. Oh, is that what IRA means? Internet Research Agency? I don't know. Anyway, alright guys, we're at exactly the 2-hour mark. Alright. My hands, man. Getting old. Freaking I'm gonna like have like fucking arthritis and shit when I'm old. Let's look at where we're at. We're actually almost done with our deep one here. We're gonna have to come up with something else to draw next month. I think I might make a print out of this. I might put some evil writing over here or something so that it looks like a page from the Necronomicon. I think that might be pretty cool. So, I think we're pretty much at a good stopping point. Thank you guys for joining. Really appreciate it. I hope that this stream was a little, you know, informative, maybe. You know, it's good to know these things from a know your enemy perspective, and also that way you know what they're talking about. Because if you ever engage with any of these people online, or if you ever read, like, you know, because you see them up in memes and shit like that, and occasionally you'll get people on Reddit or something, or you might find a YouTube video that supports these guys, and they kind of have their own language. You know, when they say certain things like we're defending the Constitution, it really means something else, you know, for example. And it's good to, I think, in my opinion, it's good to be informed about who these people are, where they came from, and so that way you can make informed decisions on whether you want to protect yourself. You should know these things, you know. For example, let's say you want to go to a protest or something, you know, like let's say there's a BLM protest, or you know, George Floyd. Well, I guess the George Floyd protests are over with now. But you know, what's that other guy that there's another guy, the guy that, you know, the police shot in the fucking back as he was driving away. You remember? I don't know his name off the top of my head. He's quickly becoming the new, you know, the new focus of BLM protests. Now that George Floyd has been resolved, they went around and shot another fucking innocent black person who wasn't, like, endangering anybody. Right? You know. And, you know, let's say you want to go to one of these protests, and then you hear that fucking the Oath Keepers are going to be there, or the 3%ers are going to be there. And it's like, you should know these things. And it's like, well, hey, if I go to this protest, fucking there might be, like, insane right-wingers with rifles there, you know? So maybe you might still want to go. Maybe you might want to skip it that day. Maybe you might want to, like, you know, take extra precautions or something. You know what I mean? If you decide to confront these people, it's good to know about this stuff. So anyway, so you can protect yourself and your family. You know, because fucking these people are out there, man, and they're serious, and you know they're violent. You know, and so. Be prepared, I guess. Anyway, let's go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and end this, guys. Thank you all so much. But before I do, I gotta go through my usual ending segment that you're all aware of. You know, please like and subscribe. I gotta say that every time. I gotta say, like and subscribe every time. And maybe one of these days I'll just get off my ass and just actually film an outro. Instead of going through all of this stuff every single time. I know, I'm just lazy. I gotta quit being so fucking lazy. But anyway, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, you can support me here monetarily on my Etsy shop. This is Estes House of Weirdness here. I will put this in the chat. Oh, wait a minute. Wrong one. Let's bring this over here. So I'll just put the link in the chat. If you want to support me monetarily, or go back to that. If you want to support me monetarily, I sell stuff on my Estes shop. These are, you know, prints and things. Here's one for the Kraken, you know, and these are 11 by 17 prints. Each one comes out a little different. I also sell stuff like this. This is a little sculpture that I made here out of like latex and stuff like that. Sculpture, little parasite type guys, right? These are one of a kind of things. So I'm going to be putting up a bunch of those on the site too. If you want to, you know, if you want to help me out here, and if you like my content, please consider buying something. If you like my artwork, you want to see more of that, this is my DeviantArt site. So let me just put that down in the chat also. So let's see, DeviantArt, booyah, right? And if you want to see more of my stuff, you know, and I post all kinds of shit here. Here's another sculpture that I actually sold this one already, but this is another sort of disgusting monster parasite sculpture that I did. This one's already been sold. But, you know, you can see other things that my other artwork here. I have comics and stuff. I have other sketches, that kind of thing, anglerfish, blah, 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 blah. So check me out there if you like my artwork. This is my webcomic. It's at hawanja.com, fun for the whole stupid family. It's got ninjas and demons and kung fu and stuff in it. So I try to update this at least once a week, although it's more like once every 2 weeks. So check me out there. And I also have other comics. This one on the side. It's called Dirty Kitchen Comics. It's more of like that sort of, you know, random internet comic shit. So please check me out. And then I have my other YouTube channel. This is UCD Videos. I do toy reviews. I do movie reviews, video gaming stuff here. You know, mainly focusing on video gaming hardware. This is the C64 Mini, for example. That's the one that I put out. You know, and I'm planning on making more videos here too. I would like to get more subs on this channel if I could. You can see my videos here don't get a lot of views, so I gotta promote it. So if you want to see me talk about non-political stuff, video games, toys, that kind of thing, please check me out on UCD Videos. All right. Okay, guys, thank you all so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. As always, thank you, Dynacat, and thank you, Cody Course. Thank you, Lewis the Hedgehog. You guys are great. Adversary Fandom 2, you're awesome. And One Life of God's good to see you again. Thank you all so much. And I will be back here again next Saturday at 11:30. Adios, folks. Take it easy.